Police officers, what is the most corrupt officer you've ever seen? So, when I was military police, we had an investigator in our unit named Jason Pringle. He spent most of his time investigating junior enlisted in his own unit for things like underage drinking because he got off on getting people in trouble. Well, turns out the dude was a sexual predator who had been essaying his own stepdaughter. Next story. Off-duty police officer was drunk driving and crashed into a man on the highway and killed him. He never went to jail. Then another one, an officer got a call of a break-in and was given the description of the suspect. They instead shot and killed the homeowner who was fighting off the suspect. They shot the homeowner like 7 times. That officer is still working instead of being charged with homicide. Next story. Grandfather was a firefighter but had cop friends. One of them on their deathbed told my grandfather, and I believe it was his daughter, about how when he was a sergeant, he would go out at closing time with a certain turtley congressman who was a judge at the time to collect payments from bars that stayed open past certain times. They would go to about 15 spots and get an envelope at each one. At the end of the night, him and the officer would each get one of the envelopes. Next story. Just because I like sharing this story, but in LA of 2015, I had just moved there a few months prior. We picked up our friend to go to a rehearsal, we stopped to get pizza, and I'm like 99% sure it was the Pizza Hut in Fashion District, but could be wrong. Anyways, we're waiting in the lobby for a pizza. It was totally dead and kind of run down. Well, a cop walks in with shades on, looks at us, walks to the counter, sits down a black bag, turns around and walks out. The clerk comes from the kitchen, grabs the bag, and brings it into the back. They didn't even see each other, no words exchanged, like it was routine maybe? That's it, that's the end, but we looked at each other like, what the hell? It was weird AF, and I wish I knew what actually happened. Okay guys, it's so obvious what happened here. It was LA, there's never any crime, it was a slow day, so the officer was doing DoorDash. He was delivering the food. The guy was tired of eating pizza, so he wanted something else. It's that simple. Anyway, next story. So, I'm in Northern Ireland, and this wasn't me, but I have a story. It happened in the 80s, and my mom knew the sister of the man who was killed. There was a police officer that liked to drink at the local pub, and everyone knew it. One night, he is almost blackout drunk when he gets into his car. So drunk, in fact, that they had someone else put the keys into the ignition and turn them for him. They sent him off anyway, and to everyone's complete surprise, he plows into a young man on a motorbike and kills him. He was so drunk he wasn't even aware of what had happened, and I believe just fell asleep in his car at the scene. When all was said and done, investigation concluded, he kept his job, his license, and his freedom while the family of the man who was killed were told it was just a freak accident and no one was at fault. Everyone in the community knew exactly what had happened. The officer faced 0 consequences, and it didn't even stop him from drunk driving. Next story. Anyone who responds and has actually worked as a cop is either A, going to be a former cop, or B, a current cop who tries to pretend that minor stuff is all that ever happens. There was a study presented at a police chief's conference back in 2000, which found that 46% of cops nationwide admitted to having personally covered up crimes committed by fellow officers, which is of course also a crime. And 73% of the time, they are forced to do so by higher-ups. If they don't fall in line, then they are forced out. The entire system is corrupt by design. Next story. My great-uncle worked for the LAPD until about 15 years ago. He was the most racist POS I've ever met in person. He used to get drunk and brag about hurting people on the job. One time he told us that he got called into a domestic dispute and the woman who had been abused was hysterical, so he hit her some to calm her down. He was eventually forced to retire with full benefits. Turns out he was abusing my great-aunt too. She left him, and we haven't seen him since. Good riddance. Next story. I am not a cop, but I used to flip houses in Florida before the 2006 to 2008 crash. I took on a project in a predominantly African-American community in Cocoa, Florida, to boost the values of that neighborhood. And once I dropped the for sale sign, a police officer who was white came by to make an offer way below the market value even for that community. I politely told him to go F off. After he left, one of the neighbors came by and asked me what had happened. After I told him about my experience, he informed me this cop owned another house in the neighborhood that is only rented to crackheads, and the rest of the neighbors were pissed about it and thanked me for not selling to him. I then later verified the cop was indeed the owner of the crack house on the property appraiser's website. Edit. I forgot to add that following the encounter, cops in that city routinely followed me and eventually ticketed me for expired tags 1 day after my birthday, 3 days before the month ended. I always renewed my tags on the last Friday of my birth month. But there was no effort to investigate the crack house 5 houses down the road from my project house. Next story. My kid's grandfather was a corrupt cop, caught up in a huge corruption sting in NSW in the 90s, I don't know, mafia, underworld related. But he had a choice. Do your business and be a witness or go to jail. He chose to snitch. His family was moved interstate, WPP for 10 years, rent paid for 10 years, he and his wife get new jobs, them and their kids given new names, etc. After 10 years, they got a payout of $500,000 and were no longer in witness protection. He was corrupt AF and literally got rewarded 10 years rent-free and $500,000. They missed out on nothing, traveled back to see their family often. I met the son, fell pregnant, and he dropped the bombshell at 6 months. Hey babe, I'm in the witness protection program. My real name is blah blah blah. That relationship sadly didn't last. He's dead now though, my kid's grandfather. Some story she'll have to tell her own kids. Next story. Not a cop, but the cops caught up in the Rampart scandal in 1990s LA has to be up there. As per Wikipedia, the Rampart scandal was a police corruption scandal which unfolded in Los Angeles, California during the late 1990s and early 2000s. The scandal concerned widespread criminal activity within the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, CRASH, anti-gang unit of the Los Angeles Police Department's Rampart Division. More than 70 police officers were initially implicated in various forms of misconduct, including police brutality, planting of false evidence, stealing and drug dealing, bank robbery, perjury, and cover-ups thereof. And as for my part, I think it's the reason OJ was acquitted. The jurors were from a community where police planting false evidence was all too common, so that it was plausible enough of a defense to create reasonable doubt. Next story. Not law enforcement, but some local PD here got caught planting drugs on a Vietnamese man's car to justify confiscating the large amount of cash he had to buy a shrimp boat. Then other law enforcement guys I was in the Army Guard with would ask guys from that department how many Vietnamese fishermen they had to pull over to afford their new cars, etc. Next story. Not a police officer, but I was training to be a correctional officer and quit after the first day over the bullcrap I saw. Some context. This happened about 10 to 12 years ago at a now closed prison in Louisiana. I'm a white guy and was probably 24 at the time. 2 major things made me leave that day and find other work. The training officer, like myself and the 7 or 8 other new hires, were all white. While giving us a tour of the prison yard, he kept talking about show them who had the power. He smiled and said, "Watch this." He took a pen from his shirt pocket and dropped it on the ground, then yelled for a black inmate who was doing some landscaping about half a football field away to come over. As the inmate jogged over, the trainer said all inmates must run to you when called. Like, literally run. Once the inmate got to us and said, "Yes, sir," the trainer told him to pick up his pen and hand it to him. The inmate said, "Yes, sir," and did it. The trainer then said, "Go back to what you were doing." Again, he said, "Yes, sir," and jogged back. This was in the July humid heat, by the way. The trainer and other hires all did this chuckle together as I thought to myself, what the F did I just see? Later on, I was put in one of those housing units to shadow the 2 officers in there supervising the inmates, a white guy and a black guy. They took me some bunks to show me how to do shakedowns and look for contraband. They had the inmate stand by his bed as they just wrecked his crap. I get you have to be thorough, but this was being done as another power trip move. The black officer then finds a copy of the black inmate's Quran, holds it up and starts asking him, "You really believe this crap?" and goes on to mock his religion. I'm not a religious guy, but again, I thought, what the F? I finished that day, and as soon as I left, I called my old boss to see if I could come back. Thankfully, they were happy to have me back. Next story. For me personally, it was this situation that unfolded in a small town in the middle of Alabama that borders the interstate. The TLDR is that in 2009, the town had only 1 cop. We're talking hella small and had overlap with another local town that provided them resources, so it's not like dude was without help. But he went to the mayor and made some claims about the town being a drug trafficking haven, and was given the go-ahead to expand the department and given the title of sheriff for the area. Well, he then proceeded to go nuts with speed trapping people, accusing them of trafficking, unlawfully detaining them, billing them through the city to tow their vehicles, and confiscated any cash or property he found in the vehicles. Many of the people that were subject to this never got their vehicles or confiscated property back. It ended up getting so bad that multiple lawsuits were filed and led to a temporary dissolution of the police department. Next story. A member of my extended family briefly served as the chief of police in Globe, Arizona. Within his first month on the job, he uncovered missing department equipment, including a razor, quads, and other valuable items. Determined to get answers, he called a meeting to question the department about the missing gear. That night, 3 officers showed up at his home with a chilling warning. If he kept digging, he wouldn't have to worry about living. The next day, he resigned and told us all what happened. Crazy stuff. Next story. I'm going to have a different take on this, and I'm going to get downvoted, but I feel like I can shed some insight. I'm a police officer who has graduated from the academy within the last few years. I can honestly say that newer cops are the ones that are more dedicated to improving public image of how people view us. I didn't get into this to bust heads or do any of that. Uvalde and what happened with Floyd made me do this. I hated what I saw and felt like I could make a difference. I understand that there is some animosity towards police, and rightfully so. I just hope that the trend declines and the bad ones get ousted and indicted as they should. I know people on Reddit usually hate cops, and I know I'm going to get some ACAB comments, but just know that not all of us subscribe to the mindset. Just my 2 cents. Next story. I'm not a cop, but me, white, and my 3 friends who were black got our boys' car robbed from us by a bunch of gorditos holding guns. One of them even popped their sawed-off shotgun to get our attention. Cops showed up and started questioning my black friends about it, if it was a drug deal gone wrong, and assuming they were gang members and it was our fault. When they asked me questions, they asked me if I was okay, if I was forced to be here, etc. Really highlighted to me how police go about assuming in investigations. Next story. Thomas Sparks, Justin Jenkins, Jeff Legault, and a few others in the Johnson City, Tennessee Police Department. The city of 100,000 people just settled a lawsuit for $28 million that alleged these officers accepted weekly payments from a drug dealer and a child predator, Sean Williams, to look the other way. They are alleged to have squashed anywhere from 25 to 100 SA cases targeting this one man. The police department had video evidence of him committing crimes against 2 children and almost 100 women in their evidence locker for almost 3 years that they had collected during an investigation. They allegedly kept this evidence under wraps as collateral to ensure continued payment. An arrestable charge against Sean was solidified after internal pushback. They dismissed the U.S. attorney assigned to their office for insisting on charging him. She is suing the city as well separately. Instead of arresting him, they tipped him off and let him skip town. Officer Legault allegedly arrested 1 victim under false pretenses in an attempt to retaliate for her pressing a case forward. The city manager in charge of the police department, Kathy Ball, attempted to buy Sean Williams' condo while he was on the run. Her agent, Shannon Castillo, handles all city government real estate deals and served as the buyer and seller agent for both Kathy Ball and Sean Williams due to her friendship with both parties. They were doing documented dead drops and keeping an eye on Sean's properties to tip him off in case of any law enforcement activities. All parties knew of Sean's activities. All of these officers are still employed, as well as the city manager and real estate agent. The lawsuit's damage comes to an almost $1,000 per household after municipal insurance kicks in. Somehow, we still can't get national traction on the story. Next story. My piece of crap stepdad worked for the LAPD, and the crap he would normalize his colleagues doing was insane. Strip clubs on the clock, giving someone an extra bit of a beating while arresting them because they were mouthy, intentionally using holds and locks that made it more likely they would injure suspects, rampant racism amongst the white officers, the list goes on. LAPD is probably one of the most corrupt forces in the U.S., behind LASD and NYPD. Next story. Military law enforcement, but I've worked with civilian law enforcement. When I was new, super new, I road patrolled with a guy who had ties to the local area. Dude was speeding on his phone without a seatbelt on the regular and didn't carry any less lethals. Didn't know this at the time. He started pulling people over left and right for doing 27 and a 25. He would brag about how many tickets he would hand out per shift. He started a competition that was quickly handled by superiors for most tickets handed out per week. A few weeks later, I was at a different post at the time, but my buddy worked the desk dispatch, and over the radio, there was a lot of back and forth that I kinda just tuned out. Eventually, I heard a few interesting comments, and apparently that same officer mentioned above has planted evidence during vehicle searches and whipped his privates out in front of people entering the base. And because of his connections, he was just moved to a different shift. On those shifts, he got caught up for excessive force, no surprise, and sexual harassment. Next story. I've been an officer for about 7 to 8 years when I was asked to fill in working security at a football game, local high school. I was out on the perimeter when a lady came up, looked at my name tag, and asked if I was a certain officer. Well, the name was for a lieutenant, and I told her that he was not working that night. About an hour later, I was in the parking lot when the same lady drove up to me. Her 16-year-old cheerleader daughter was with her. She asked her daughter, "Is this him?" And her daughter said, "No, Mom, that's not him." By this time, I was really wondering what's going on. Mom tells me that her daughter has always dated losers, and she was so glad to hear that her daughter was finally dating someone who was respectable. Turns out, the 16-year-old daughter was dating my lieutenant, not knowing he was 38, married with 3 kids. And I said, "No, ma'am, that isn't me. I am married and I don't date high school girls." I turned and left the area. That lieutenant eventually became an assistant chief and continued sleeping with younger women, even when his wife was dying of cancer years later. He was a sack of crap. Next story. Not a cop, but logging into my alt account to tell my story. I'm a dark-skinned black woman, but was a college student when this happened. Had my phone stolen out of my hands on the subway at around midnight. Marcy J. last stop from BK to Manhattan. Didn't know what to do, but I knew my dad would want a police report to write off on taxes. Only know Union Square precinct off the top of my head. Went there, and they said because it happened in BK, I had to go back. They wouldn't drive me or help me, but would have officers meet me at Marcy J. It's now close to 2 a.m. when 2 male cops show up. One's 30s and black, and one maybe 50s older and white. I tell them the details and a description of 3 Hispanic-looking teenagers who snatched it out of my hand. They ask me over and over again, and I'm annoyed because I don't expect to get the phone back or catch them. I just want a police report, and it's late. The older white cop keeps asking like he is trying to trip up a suspect. Then, and I swear he smirked, he said, "Sure they weren't black?" And I was shocked. And no, for the millionth time, Hispanic, teenagers. He said, "Well, it sounds like they could have been black." And I look at the black cop, and he just pretends not to hear. Then they say for the police report we have to go back to the station, all the way at Broadway Junction, nowhere near Macy J stop. And I am reluctant and naive, so I say, okay. We get in the car, and they say they first will drive around the area to see if I spot them. It's hours after it, so I'm like, we can just go to the station. Nope, I'm expected to look for a bit. They start pointing out every single black man, and they're saying, "Is it him? If you say it is, we'll pick them up for questioning." And honestly, I am not sure if they are serious, but they make me do this, spewing racist BS for at least 30 minutes. So it's getting to be 3 a.m. if not later, and I am mortified. The blatant racism, and the black cop is still barely speaking while his partner is saying the most vile stuff, joking about how they can ruin a guy's night if I want, and still pointing out only black men. I get agitated and tell them to please just let me out. They basically laugh at me and say no. I started the process, so I have to finish it. I'm getting really upset at this point. I'm now stuck in a car with racist cops and nobody knows where I am. Then we drive down Broadway in BK. It's dark and long and a straight shot to the station under the elevated subway tracks. Dangerous street, basically. They say, "Watch this." They proceeded to blow through red lights, and both cops are laughing. I think they put the lights on, speeding. They say this is the perk of being a cop, and I start yelling at them because I think I'm going to die. I tell them to let me out, to forget the whole thing, and they laugh and refuse. To this day, I consider it kidnapping. It was one of the scariest moments of my entire life. We get to the station, and we are so deep into BK. I have no idea where I am. I'm newish to visiting Brooklyn. It's 4 a.m. at a police station, creepy and violent, people tweaking out, etc. They make me wait and wait. And finally, a female cop takes my statement, and I break down crying. She offers me tissues but barely cares, and then leaves me at a table. Then the white cop comes to me to take my statement again, and at this point it is clear he is just effing with me, probably because I am black. He made a few other comments to that effect. Then he says, "Okay, you're free to go," as if I was the criminal. It's 5 a.m., still dark. I'm traumatized and exhausted. I have no idea where I am. I have no phone, and I basically lose it. And I demanded that they drive me home, which is in Soho in Manhattan. They say they aren't a taxi, and I start freaking out, so finally a female cop and her partner agree to take me home soon. I wait another 30 minutes to an hour before they drive me all the way back to my apartment. I'm sobbing the entire time, and neither of them asks me why, and I basically slept for 2 days straight. If it had happened now, I would have raised hell. But in reality, I was young and about to move abroad, so I just buried it and tried to forget it happened. I had already had only bad experiences with police in my hometown, but this night, feeling confined for so many hours, broke something in me. Next story. Local police sergeant used to be a funeral inspector, but lost his job for harvesting his customers' brains for cash. The federal probe said he made at least $150K from this in the late 90s to early 2000s. He also had a group of teenagers working for him after 6 hours of work and decided not to pay them, with zero repercussions. The brain thing is more important, though. Next story. I'm curious if this was actually asked in good faith, but I'll bite. I haven't met them because they're smart enough not to get caught. Like all criminals, corrupt cops don't want to get caught, so they'll cover their tracks. Knowing the system allows them to do a better job than most criminals. The most corrupt cop I've known wasn't even corrupt. He was just dumb. On paper, he looked great. Son of first-generation immigrants, so he spoke multiple languages and dialects, college degree, physically fit, but had zero self-awareness or social skills. For example, one time he tried to cover up napping on the job by wearing sunglasses, except he worked midnight shift and it was 2 a.m. Another time, he came in and worked several hours of overtime because he thought as long as you were at work, they had to pay you. But he stopped when he couldn't find anyone to sign his overtime slip. He would flirt and hit on any woman he could in the most uncomfortable way and had no idea that what he was doing was unprofessional at best. Nothing he did was misconduct, it was just awkward as F. He didn't last long, though. He left and got hired by a smaller department back home. But he was fired by them before he started for submitting forged documents that they didn't even ask for, and that also disqualified him from coming back to the US. I've tried to look him up on open source databases, but he has a very common name, think John Smith, and it's too tough to find him. Next story. Not a law enforcement officer, but my best friend was. He got pushed into resigning because his lieutenant falsified a bunch of reports and he wouldn't corroborate them. She didn't respond when he requested backup on a call, and then tried to say they had phone conversations about the incident despite those calls never happening, and no record existing of said calls. She wrote up a report saying he disobeyed orders and a bunch of other stuff and ran it up the chain. The options they gave him were essentially resign on his own or sign off on all of her reports and they'd help him transfer. Then the same lieutenant went after another deputy who was injured/had surgery and tried to prove that he was faking his injury by having people stake out his house to try and catch him in the act. Lady ruined the careers of 2 young officers because she wanted more power and could. Next story. There was a deputy at my husband's old office that was 3D printing and selling ghost guns. When multiple people told the sheriff about it, they were told to stop being jealous of the deputy and to not tattle. That same deputy was also the only officer to work her fiancé's crash where he wasn't investigated for DUI and driven home. This was the same department that had a deputy leave drugs in their patrol vehicle when they left their car at the mechanic shop instead of putting them into evidence. And the mechanic found them and took TikTok videos of themselves doing lines of coke on the patrol car hood. But don't worry, he got promoted because he's a good boy born and raised in the county. Long story short, small-town sheriff's offices will always protect their own. Get out and vote, people. Next story. I had a brother-in-law who was a small-town cop in a college town. He got kicked off the force for pulling over attractive girls on traffic violations and then offering to let them go without a citation if they would go out on a date with him. Well, 2 of the girls happened to be friends, they compared notes, realized that it was an ongoing practice of depredation, and put up a notice on a bulletin board. Then other girls came forward, and they all went to the chief of police. Brother-in-law was not charged with abuse of authority. He was definitely guilty of it, but the chief allowed him to sign a confession and allowed him to resign from the police department. He became a security guard at a local cannery. Next story. Not me, but I went to basic training with a guy who had this story back in 2011. He had been a cop in Ferguson, Missouri. He quit and joined the Air Force to get a safer job, as he told it. And he said he witnessed his senior partner do a drive-by shooting of a group of teenagers. The officer filed a report claiming they pointed a gun at his cruiser. My buddy tried to file a complaint and was told to keep your mouth shut or you'll end up dead. The implication being they were going to kill him and blame it on some random local and then go kill said local. So he quit and enlisted. When the Ferguson riots broke out, he was not surprised, to say the least. Next story. I've got a few from just one cop. Guy was a total piece of crap, but most of it was just him being a drunken idiot. He got pulled over for 3 DUIs in a single night. He got out of all of them because he flashed his badge. He crashed into a ditch and blew out a tire, or the other way around. Then a 4th cop showed up after the first 3 played catch and release, realized he was drunk and just drove his dumb ass home. He handed a loaded firearm to a drunk teenager whom he got drunk, sold contraband to inmates when he had to do his rotation in the jail, got drunk and fell in front of a bar, lost his front teeth, accused an innocent person who tried to help him of assault, tried meth for weight loss, hit on every single girlfriend a friend would bring over, got his girlfriend pregnant so she wouldn't leave him. It almost worked, but when she was almost due, he spent every night drinking, talking about how it was his last shot at freedom. Discharged firearms constantly in city limits, usually, as you guessed, while intoxicated, attempted to essay at least 3 women that I know about, and he got very drunk one night, passed out in his own vomit. His mom was dropping his son off the next morning. He walked in on his dad passed out in his own vomit. At least his mom reamed him out. The kid eventually got primary placement with the baby mama because the dad was such a mess, even a badge didn't help him. Okay, so first off, I don't approve of anything this guy did in this story, so let's just make that clear. But I've often said that if I could watch our timeline as a TV show, without maybe the essay, I would definitely watch that guy. That would be a character I would pay attention to because what the hell? Oh my goodness, what an idiot. Oh, anyway, next story. Current mayor of Fresno, California, Jerry P. Dreyer. Not only did he essay a minor, his deputy, under investigation for drug trafficking, also showed up dead on Jerry's lawn. But none of that stopped him from being elected mayor. This is from a local NPR affiliate back in 2019 before he became mayor. It says, if Fresno were another place, Jerry Dreyer's career might have ended in a federal courtroom 2 years ago. He had been called to testify in a case that, once again, portrayed Fresno not as the 5th largest city in the state with forward-thinking institutions, but a backwater of corruption a century and a quarter deep. Dreyer wasn't just any witness. He strode into the downtown courthouse wearing a crisp dark blue uniform with 4 gold Chiefs stars popping out from the collar. He was in his late 50s, but his neck, chest, and arms still bulged from decades of lifting weights. His signature mustache, now gray, was set off by a head completely shaven. His 16-year tenure as chief made him one of the longest-serving leaders of a big city police department in modern California history. He had remained the chief by escaping scandal time and time again. From front-page revelations that he had been investigated for sex with a minor, to the bizarre case of one of his high-ranking officers and good friends turning up dead in front of Dreyer's home under mysterious circumstances. The case before the federal court now raised questions so troubling about his administration of the police department, about his supervision of his right-hand man, that Dreyer's conduct itself might have been on trial. His second-in-command, Keith Foster, had been charged as the kingpin of his own drug trafficking organization. The 2 men had spent their careers side by side as Foster followed Dreyer in every promotion. His office was the only one Dreyer passed every day on his way to his own. Foster's arrest on charges of conspiring to distribute heroin, marijuana, and oxidone had surprised even jaded City Hall watchers who had seen the FBI in the 1990s arrest dozens of local developers and politicians in a lengthy probe dubbed Operation Rezone. But federal authorities accusing a top official in a major city of running a drug ring was different. So stunning was Foster's arrest that a top columnist in the city compared it to the shock of the Pearl Harbor attack. Like many others in Fresno, the columnist expected Dreyer and the other city leaders to face tough questions about what they did and didn't know. As Dreyer walked into the courtroom that spring day, the city's eyes were on him, waiting to see how he would answer for himself. But strangely, Dreyer hadn't been called as a witness for the prosecution. He was there on behalf of Foster's defense. When one of the prosecutors asked him to explain how he felt when he learned of Foster's arrest, he described emotions, shock, hurt, and a sense of betrayal in a flat tone that belied such feelings. Over and over, he repeated that Foster had always had his full trust, right up to the day the deputy chief was hit with a 7-count federal indictment after he was pulled over by federal agents as he left his nephew's house. As prosecutors continued their questioning of Dreyer, they might have delved into why the police chief had missed or chosen to ignore flagrant signs of trouble, but prosecutors never asked the chief about Foster's finances, which had long ago spiraled out of control. He'd lost his house to foreclosure, he'd been hit with an IRS lien, and his wages had been garnished after repeated failures to pay alimony and child support. All the while, according to his ex-wife, he lived a lavish lifestyle, complete with furs, jewelry, and expensive clothing. They didn't ask Dreyer why he maintained his trust in Foster, even as the deputy chief was accused on 2 occasions of spousal and child abuse. Neither did prosecutors ask about accusations from 2 women that Foster had sexually harassed and essayed them. All of this information was readily available in court documents open to the public. The only noteworthy testimony elicited by the feds from Dreyer had to do with Foster's main line of defense, that he was working on the city's heroin problem, and that's why he had repeated contracts with a major heroin dealer. Dreyer told the jury that if Foster was working in such a capacity, he never produced a report on his findings. Next story. Kevin P. Crum, probationary officer for Champaign, Illinois Police Department. He moved from Kentucky to Champaign with his wife and kid. He left behind a secret mistress and even more secret children in his former Kentucky place of residence. And on August 30th, 2003, Crum was caught by a security guard trespassing at 2 o'clock in a Kentucky business parking lot. He was observed putting on a wig and body armor and retrieving a long gun from the trunk of his car. Further investigation by the police revealed several more firearms inside the car, and an actual checklist for the murder of a child and other persons. Crum was about to break into his mistress's trailer and kill everyone inside, including her, his own child, and several other relatives of the mistress. Crum was going to stage the scene as a burglary gone bad. Crum had stolen a license plate from a vehicle in Champaign to place on his vehicle, which was in possession of at least one stolen firearm, and had collected material from several sources to spread around the scene in an attempt to contaminate any DNA analysis. This was all due to his mistress filing for child support, and he received an 18-year sentence. Next story. Not a cop, but related to a former cop and a former public defender. I believe this story is from the 90s in our small hometown. Cops caught a local lawyer with coke and tried to blackmail him. He counter-blackmailed, and they called it a draw. But years later, that lawyer killed his young boyfriend and then himself. I keep wondering if that young man would be alive if the cops had done their job back in the day. Next story. In Detroit, 2 cops tried to pull over a vehicle for speeding. The car sped up. The officers initiated a pursuit. During the chase, the 19-year-old driver sped through a residential neighborhood and crashed into a tree. At the time of the chase, the officers did not use their sirens and only turned their lights on at the end. DPD has a policy that prohibits high-speed chases unless there is a violent felony. Statistics show they result in higher risk for crashes and deaths of other drivers. To avoid the consequences of the unauthorized chase, the 2 DPD police officers deliberately shut off their lights, lied in their report, and claimed they did not pursue the vehicle. After the crash, the squad car left the scene of the accident without rendering aid or calling an ambulance and waited for a resident to call 911 about the crash. Then, the officers responded because they were in the area. Okay, guys, I'm curious, what do you think about this one? Because if I'm looking at it from the police officer's perspective. If I pull someone over and then they start speeding off, that's indicative of possibly something worse. They may have something. They may have done something. They may have thought that they've been caught. Like, that's suspicious. So wanting to pursue somebody who's doing suspicious behavior isn't the craziest thing given the circumstances, because it's not like racially motivated from what's being told here. Like, they sped away. There's potential danger here, and you're not allowed to chase somebody unless we already know they did something awful with a violent felony. This one, I don't know, maybe I need to read on this or I'm not understanding it completely. I don't approve of what the officers did, but that's kind of a dumb rule. And I say all of this still fully aware of the statistics that OP mentioned, but, oh, that guy's running from police. Let's not chase him? What? I'm curious what you guys think on this one. Anyway, next story. So, you should try the police in Alaska sometime. They protect the oil industry like you wouldn't believe. For instance, one of the folks who was pushing against the Alaska oil pipeline was found dead on the beach in Valdez. He was shot 7 times with a 6-shot revolver. The gun was found next to him. He was wearing a condom with female secretions on it, and they ruled it out as him taking his own life. Or in the small western village of Stebbins, every police officer pled guilty to domestic violence charges within the last 10 years. The 7 officers had served time in jails, prisons of halfway houses. Only 1 officer had ever received any kind of formal law enforcement training. Next story. I used to work at a Mexican restaurant. The local state troopers had a deal in place with us. Our side, if they called in and ordered lemonades to go, it was actually margaritas in a to-go cup, which is illegal. This was either when their shift was over and they were headed home, or they were off duty. Then, when they were in the restaurant, they would order the Blue Light Special, which was this really huge fajita quesadilla with tons of ingredients, but we'd only charge them $5. And for their side, anytime there was a roadblock, the 2 guys who were in the country illegally always got waved through. If there was a roadblock somewhere else that they weren't working, we'd always get an anonymous phone call letting us know. Less important, if we ever got stopped for speeding on our way to work, we never got a ticket. Next story. Coworker used to be a cop. He was early on in his career when his shift supervisor picked him up for that day's training. It was early morning, and the shift supervisor, who I remind you had been driving and continued to drive, was drunk off his ass. Coworker quit at the end of the day. Looked into reporting it but got told by a lawyer that the thin blue line would prevail. So he kept quiet about it and tells as many people as possible not to drive within 5 car lengths of a police car. Next story. All sorts of crap goes on that we don't get told about. Last time I was out drinking with older officers. They seemed to talk endlessly of their contemporaries that had misbehaved over the years. When I go to training with police from the other half of the country, they talk endlessly about the kind of skullduggery officers are getting up to there. In my own area, I never heard of anything until years after it happens, unless it is big enough to hit the news, then everyone knows. The corruption I see is low level, but extremely damaging. Slow, lazy, ineffective policing. Next story. Antoinette Renee Frank, born April 30th, 1971, is a former officer of the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD, who on March 4th, 1995, committed a violent armed robbery at a restaurant which resulted in the killing of 2 members of the Vietnamese American family who ran the establishment, and fellow NOPD officer Ronald A. Williams II. She was aided by her probable lover, drug dealer Rogers Lacaze. Miss Frank has been incarcerated since 1995 at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, the only woman on the state's death row. Next story. Not a police officer, but I know 2 of them in a major city, and one of them eventually became chief. I told both of them that I'm not comfortable around police and I don't trust them based on my experiences. Both of them insisted that you can totally trust the police and that corruption isn't allowed on the force. So I told both of them, okay, well what about Officer Batista? And both of them had pretty much the same response. Oh, yeah, that guy, he's as corrupt as it gets, but we can't get rid of him because of the police union. Now look, I trust both of the cops I know personally, but seeing as they work for a force that allows corruption, ACAB. Next story. Not a cop, but I'm sure everyone from a small town had this happen. The cops go out busting underage drinking parties because they have nothing more important to do. They would let all the best high school athletes go and get everyone else in trouble. This happened literally all the time in my town. Everyone knew, but God forbid the starting small forward on the basketball team get an underage drinking charge on his record. Next story. I'm not a police officer, but look up Jamie Knoll. Some of you may recognize the name as the sheriff of Clark Co., Indiana from the first 2 seasons of 60 Days In. Looks like Bobby Hill from King of the Hill all grown up. He was a state cop, then sheriff, head of the Clark County Republican Party, no shock he was Republican, and he and his wife owned an ambulance service. They and his oldest daughter bilked the county out of millions, which was spent on international vacations, classic cars. He had a barn with about 60 or 65 of them, $8,000 suits and shoes, like $52,000 of cigars, a helicopter, a train, etc. Most of the money was stolen, but some of it was contracts that he got from the county council because he had friends on the council. Some were males who were good old boys that he took on trips and gave gifts to. Cincinnati Red tickets, amongst other things. One was a hot blonde who he knocked up. I was told from a reliable source that when his wife found out he'd gotten someone else pregnant, she literally cut his Hellcat in half with some kind of saw. Then he managed to screw his nieces and nephews out of almost all of the inheritance when his brother Leon died, and I believe somehow his daughter ended up with ownership of Leon's home. He, Misty, his wife, and Casey, the daughter, all spent tons of money on the ambulance company's credit card, which was screwing the entire county because those bills were paid by taxpayers. He also had the taxpayers sporting the bill for his child support on the councilwoman's baby. He was just sentenced about a month or 2 ago, pleading guilty to 34 felonies, crying like a B-word during his apology. Crying because he knew how many of his soon-to-be fellow inmates were put there by him and would love some retribution at the expense of his chubby-ass cheeks. The daughter pled guilty to 9 felonies, theft and tax evasion, and it was announced that she's taking her pretty face to prison while pregnant, and Misty is still awaiting trial. This is kind of the short version, too. You'd have to look it all up to be as completely enraged as you should be about everything. Next story. Not a cop myself, but when he was still in New Orleans, I had a couple of encounters with Len Davis. He's probably one of the most corrupt cops out there. I've spoken to people who study criminal justice, and they say he's always mentioned in their textbooks. To put this into perspective, Ineffective, while he was under investigation by the FBI for running a protection racket for cocaine dealers, amongst other things, he ordered a hit on a woman who had filed an excessive force complaint against him. The FBI was actually actively monitoring his phone at the time, but they didn't understand what he was doing when he gave the order. Once they figured it out, unfortunately, after the murder had been committed, they ended their own investigation so that they could focus on the murder. He was sentenced to execution but got a commutation from Biden to a life sentence with no possibility of parole. He's actually fighting that because he has more appeal options if he has a death penalty. But whether or not he can do that is still being argued in the courts. Regardless, he's unlikely to ever be released or forgotten. Well, folks, this video certainly enraged me at a few points, and I suspect it might have enraged you. There were too few times where justice wasn't done, but I will give you one story. I always try to provide my own relevant stories to these videos, and I have one. I had a best friend growing up, and we kind of drifted apart as you typically do, and his dad was a police officer. Anyway, years later, I'm eating dinner with my family. I walk out of the room, and my mom's like, "Kevin, isn't that your friend's dad on the news?" And I'm like, "What?" Comes back on. Turns out he did a bunch of stuff to women in the 90s. They were all overage, so I guess I'll give him that. But lots of SA stuff, and I don't exactly remember. I was a kid at the time, like middle school age. But thankfully, he went to jail and justice was served in this instance. But he was like a cool guy. My dad liked him. He would buy candy for me and my friend. He would show us wrestling stuff. We found his Playboy magazine one time. But that's another story, folks. But thank you all so much for watching the video. Have a really good day, and bye-bye.